We look at the world today, which is different from the world yesterday, particularly in Manchester. Does it change the discussion up on the Hill? Because that budget, as we know, is going to propose a lot of cuts in social programs. It's also going to propose increases in defense and homeland security. As you look at it, as a Democrat, are you more open to that today than you were yesterday?
Well, you know, we all agree that we have to have a very effective and strong national defense policy and an adequate budget. And Democrats are not averse to raising money for defense. As a matter of fact, in the omnibus budget that we passed for 2017, the last 5 months, we agreed to an increase of about $20 billion in the defense budget. What we don't appreciate is the fact that this budget seems to totally ignore the fact that economic security and a strong population, well-educated, well-trained, is essential for our national security as well. And this budget that's proposed, will be proposed this morning, eliminates all of those investments, or a great deal of those investments that are essential to a strong society. So we're going to be very, very aggressive in pushing back against these cuts. This budget came from the farthest right flanks of the Republican Party. It doesn't reflect mainstream Republicanism, not to speak of mainstream Americanism.
So, Congressman, it strikes me that we've got three things here that are competing, and you can't have all of them. One of them is national security, another is economic security, as you just talked about, and the third is the deficit. As you try to solve that equation, as a leading Democrat, how do you do it? Do you run up the deficit?
Well, you know, there's a deficit and then there's a sustainable deficit. Right now, the deficit that we're running is considered by most economists to be sustainable. But the problem with the Republican budget is they never deal with the revenue side of the equation, and that's something we're going to have to look at. We've got $1.2 or $3 trillion worth of tax expenditures in the budget. We can deal with those. We've never looked at those. Republicans haven't been willing to do that. And then, of course, there's the question of what's the adequate tax revenues. So while we need a lean and mean and efficient federal budget, we also need to have adequate resources. And anybody who says that we can balance the budget just by cutting these incredibly important investments that this budget proposes, I think has a very unrealistic perspective on real life in America.
So as you know, Congressman, the outline that came out of the White House did say we need to take on some of those tax expenditures, but they're doing it so they can pay for significant tax cuts. As far as you're concerned right now, are those tax cuts off the table?
Well, the magnitude that they're proposing that the president proposed in his one-page plan, if you can call it a plan, are totally unrealistic. And to lower corporate rates to 15% and allow pass-throughs for everybody who is a business owner is just not going to fly. I think there are changes we can make in the corporate rate. I think the OECD average corporate rate's about 27%. Something in that range would be acceptable to a lot of Democrats. I think President Obama proposed reducing the rate from 35% to 28%. So there are compromises that can be made, and I think we ought to look at those. But again, when you're talking about tax cuts that may approach $6 trillion over 10 years, that's something the economy can't afford.
So, Congressman, you're known as someone who can work across the aisle. You can work with your Republican counterparts. Do you see a path through to actually come up with a budget that people can agree on? And particularly as we look forward to this fall and look at the possible shutdown of the government, and you have the debt ceiling as well.
I think we just showed that we can do that. The omnibus budget was something that was a very, very, I think, agreeable compromise. The administration wanted $30 billion in increased defense spending and $18 billion in cuts to non-defense discretionary spending, and we ended up with $20 billion or so in defense increase and $10 billion or so in non-defense. So we showed that we could work together and come up with something that meets most of our priorities on both sides. And so I don't see why there's any reason we can't do that in this budget.